This video is the first video in a multi-part series on gallery wraps and understanding all the different options that are out there for gallery wraps. And ultimately what we're going to be creating is something kind of like you see here, where we have one image that is going to span multiple panels. And the process in creating this type of configuration is not really complicated if you understand everything that is required, because there are a lot of steps to get to that point. And of course, this technique can be expanded upon to cascade across more panels, both horizontally and vertically. And depending on the image we're working with, some images will work better than others. So we're going to go ahead and get started here and show you all the individual steps on prepping an image for a gallery wrap. And this is the first part. So first things first, let's open up an image to work with. So let's say, for example, I wanted to use this image right here to create a gallery wrap. So we'll go ahead and choose to open this image in black and white form. Now, the first thing in any time we're producing anything is to understand the requirements for the lab that we're going to use to produce our gallery wrap. So let's take a look at Canvas on Demand. It's a great website. All the information's here. They really did a really good job of demonstrating and giving us very concrete details of what we need to create our gallery wrap. So let's go ahead and look at the frequently asked questions. And there's a lot of really good information here, but this is what we're interested in: image preparation. And it really talks about everything that they offer. Now, with Canvas on Demand, they offer three thicknesses of gallery wraps. They have what they call the thin, the thick, and the chunk. And let's focus on the thick. So we'll go ahead and open that up, and it tells us exactly what is going to be required. It doesn't really go into great detail about what the most typical way to process this is, but it does give us the information. So right here it tells us that the thick stretcher bars are 1.5 inches thick. Our file size should be 3¼ inches larger in both dimensions than the face of the canvas itself. So if we're going to be doing a 16 by 20 canvas, the image should be 19¼ by 23¼ and it gives us all that information here. So you can see that this 1 5/8 border all the way around, that is what is going to wrap around the thickness of the stretcher bar. So that's easy enough to understand. But how do we actually prepare the image that we're going to be working with? Now, there's lots of ways to do this. There really isn't no quote-unquote right or wrong way, but I'm going to show you the most typical way you'll see. So first things first, I'm going to crop my image. So I already know in this particular case I'm not using really a high enough resolution image for a 16 by 20 canvas, but let's just say hypothetically you knew you were. The first thing we're going to do is come in here to Photoshop and do a 16 or 20 inches wide by 16 inches tall. And if you go to the Canvas on Demand website, notice that they recommend 150 pixels per inch. So again, every lab is a little bit different, so get this information ahead of time so that you know when you're doing your design work, everything's going to work out perfectly. So 150 pixels per inch, and again, we're going to make a selection within our image. Now notice our selection is more or less the same proportions. Not actually, it is quite almost exactly the proportions of the image itself. And let me just escape this for a moment, because if we look at the actual image size of our image, you'll notice that it's 12 by 10. If I lower my resolution to 150, let me cancel that and go back in and do that again. And I'm not going to resample my image. But if I lower my resolution to 150, notice that the width and height dimensions actually increase in size. And they're already actually 16 by 20. So again, I'm not going to do that because I want to just show you this example. But let's just go ahead and make a selection. with our crop tool, and I now go ahead and hit enter. Okay, now when I look at my image size, you will see that in fact it is 20 by 16 by 150 pixels. Okay, so now we know that our image is the same size of our canvas. So what do we do about the edge? Because we know, if we've looked at gallery wraps, we know that the image will actually stretch around the sides. Now what we don't want to do is, in most cases, your images on their face, we're not, because you know it's asking us to add 3 inches, 3¼ inches. So for example, if I were to come in here and make a fixed size selection of 1 5/8, notice how much of my image would actually be eaten up going around the corner. And if I do it on this side, you could see her elbow would not be on the face of the canvas, but would actually be wrapped around the side on the side stretcher bar. So we don't want to cut into our image itself to wrap around, but we do want to give the illusion of that wraparound image. So again, this is the most typical process. So what we're going to do here, over in our layers palette, we're going to duplicate this layer, and then we're going to add some canvas size. So we simply go up to image and then choose canvas size, and in this box, in our case, we need to add 1 5/8 inches all the way around the perimeter on all 4 sides. And when we're entering the values with this relative option selected, what we need to do is double that value. So in other words, if we know we need 1 5/8 border, we need to take 1.625 times 2, gives us 3¼ which correlates to what the Canvas on Demand told us. So let's go ahead and add 3¼ and 3¼ Okay, so now you can see we have this canvas around the outside edge. If I were to go make my selection again, I have a fixed size selection already set to 1 5/8 by 100. Notice that that lines up absolutely perfectly, which is exactly what we wanted. So now what do we do to extend the image to wrap around the corner? Well, the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to select the image layer. On our background layer, let's just go ahead and fill that with white so we don't get confused. So up here on layer 1, I'm going to drag over a guideline. I have my rulers visible. You turn those on and off by hitting Control or Command R. And I'm just going to drag a ruler over, and by default it'll snap right to the edge of my image. And I'm going to do that all the way around, like so. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create this fixed size selection, which I've already done. See here in the options bar, you can choose from normal, fixed ratio, and fixed size. I typed in, notice my unit value, and all these little things are important Photoshop knowledge, but notice my unit value is set to inches. If I enter a dimension by default, like if I entered in 1.5 and I hit the tab key, notice it adds IN at the end. And so for the height, if I were to type in 100 and hit enter or tab, notice it would think I meant 100 inches. But we can actually override this, because what I want to do is I want to create a selection 100%. And now we know that the width is 1.5 and the height is 100%. And I'm just going to click near this guideline, and you can see what I got. I got a guideline, or a selection rather, that's 1.5 inches wide by 100% tall. And what I actually need is a guideline that's 1 5/8 inches. Right? So let's go ahead and again click near the guideline, and boom. By default, Photoshop will snap. If there's a guideline relatively close, it'll snap right to the guideline. Alright, so now that we have that, what we need to do is this little area of the image, we need to promote to its own separate layer. And to do that, we're just going to hit Control J, and then we're going to free transform. So hit Control T, Command T on a Mac, and all you have to do is just drag it over. So what essentially happens is kind of this fake look. You can see if we look here now, let me just toggle this on and off so you can see. See how it looks like we just like kind of extended her leg as it wraps around the corner. And that's exactly, of course, the look that we were going for. So what we need to do, we need to do the exact same thing to the other side. And to turn my guidelines on and off, all I'm doing is hitting Control H or Command H. Again, that's just a little Photoshop thing. Now, for this side, we're just going to click anywhere to create a selection, and then because we're in the marquee selection tool, if we hover over inside the selection, we can pick it up and move it right there. Okay? And so back on layer 1, which is our image layer, we're going to do that same thing. We're going to clip that little section away by hitting Control or Command J on a Mac. And then again, we're going to free transform, which is Control T. And then we'll go ahead and hit Enter. So now you can see how that a part of the image is just kind of going to get wrapped around the side. And again, if I turn off my guidelines, you'll see that it'll look really nice. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten these three images, or these three layers. So I selected those three layers. I could just select the topmost layer and hit Control E, Control E. That'd get it done. Another way is just to select all three layers, right click, and then choose the merge layer option. Same difference. Okay, so all three are on the same layer now. And then we'll just flip-flop these dimensions. So my width will become my height, and my height will become my width by clicking on these two little arrows and click inside my document. Again, we're on this image layer here. So just like before, Control J, Control T, and stretch. Just like so. And do the exact same thing to the bottom. Click anywhere, hover over the selection, drag it down to the guideline. We're on our image layer. We'll promote that little section to its own layer. Control J and free transform. Okay. And now we've expanded the image enough to wrap around these sides, and it's going to look fantastic. Now, there are some additional treatments that some people like to do. For example, let me go ahead and merge these layers back together again. What we could do is we could make a selection. We'll go back to our normal style selection because we have these guidelines in place here. We could make a selection, and I could do select inverse. And what that does is it selects everything but our image. So it's selecting that area that we extended, it's selecting that area. And some people like to do all kinds of different things, and some of it can actually look really nice. For example, one thing we could do if we wanted to, we could add just a little bit of blur. That's probably a little bit too much, but what we could do is we could add a little blur to kind of de-emphasize it still gives the same color and tone, but it does de-emphasize the edges a little bit. So you'll see that effect sometimes. We could give it a solid color if we wanted to. We could just leave it black or white or some other color that would match our image. That's certainly acceptable as well. Another thing we could do if we wanted to is we could come in here and pick up our burn tool, believe it or not, and just zoom in here a little bit. And again, this is really just a matter of personal preference. But what we could do is we could actually burn this edge right where the two meet. We could darken it a little bit. And, it may have a really nice effect. It just depends on, what you could do here. And if you notice what I'm doing, I'm clicking on one side, holding my shift key and clicking on the other. What that does is create a perfect line. So again, I'm just going back and forth. Because you see my exposure up here is set to 50%. And I'm going to do the same thing vertically now. Add in a little bit of... And again, it's just really just a matter of personal preference. On the left side of this particular image, it's mostly black. so you're not really going to see the effect very well. But you'll be able to see this a little bit better, this effect a little bit better uh, once I get out of here. So let me just deselect and turn off my guidelines, and now you can see that effect a lot better. And it really does have a nice effect once the canvas is wrapped around the sides. Just that little bit of darkening can add a really nice effect. So you could just kind of play with those edges, and really what you're going to have to do is get a couple of them made and see what effect you like. But that is the general process when you're dealing with a single image panel. Now what we need to do is take this basic knowledge that we have and kind of expand on that when we're going to take a single image and cascade it across multiple panels. There's a little bit more work involved and a little bit more understanding involved in order to accomplish that task. So that's what we're going to show you in part 2. Thanks for watching.